yeah, I suppose creativity is ultimately around expression, self-expression, and I think creativity is it's a great extension of biodiversity and diversity in itself, which is everyone's got their own take on it, and it's both something that can be intellectually expressed, it can be emotionally expressed, physically expressed, and it's actually it's an activity that threads through so many aspects of society and community. And I think very often we see creativity very much in just the arts. And I was discussing this to my team, that actually even being a practical problem solver and a person that gets things done takes aspects of creativity. So it's not necessarily just artistic merit, but I think, you know, sometimes we use creativity just to function through life. So yeah, I think it's something that we all have access to and possess, and it's quite democratic in some ways.
So the young people that you work with, how do you empower them to be more creative?
I think our bottom line rule, and again, this is almost fast forwarding without giving too much context on their backgrounds, but the biggest, you know, any young people working with me, the first sort of 3 sentences will always include that mistakes are okay. I think that's the first thing that we need to understand, that we've got to empower people to find their path and find their way of doing things. And yeah, our first rule is to really understand that mistakes are okay. You know, do your best, learn from it, and then work around it. And the next part is that there are more solutions than problems. So those two, we believe, are almost the best permission you can give someone to access creativity. And again, I am, you know, probably speaking in a meta sort of sense, and going for the big picture thinking rather than going for specific types of creativity. But really, yeah, from a mindset perspective, lowering the barriers, removing the fear, and go express yourself is what we believe in.
So when you teach students that mistakes are okay, and I know that you work with vulnerable young adults, and when they go to the workplace and they make mistakes and get sacked for it, how can they reconcile with, like, where it's okay to make mistakes? Because as I say, in the workplace, they might easily get fired for making mistakes.
Yeah, so I think then it's really about context. So for the young people that stay with me for longer, I think we spend a lot of time helping them understand the psychology of behavior, and understanding that, you know, the scenario you're talking about tends to occur in fear-based organizations. So, you know, we have to be kind of fair to say that there is no enterprise on earth that won't encounter some form of mistakes. Some mistakes cost people more dearly than others. And I think it's about really distinguishing recklessness away from creativity that happens to maybe have not gone the way, or risk-taking, recklessness versus risk-taking. So what we promote is very much considered thinking, understanding the end point of what you want out of whatever your activity is, understanding that, you know, you do have to have some form of responsibility and risk-taking, but then also look at, well, if it doesn't go right, what am I going to do about fixing things? And I think it's also about communicating that, okay, I am going to be trying to do this with the intention of this output, but if it doesn't go right, this is how I'm going to fix it. I think once you communicated that, very often you've let people know that you're prepared. And I think it's unlikely that, you know, being fired may occur. However, you know, in the cases where it does, then it's also about then learning about the, you know, the culture in which you express your creativity possibly matters just as much. I think, again, when mistake happens, it's really important not to kind of maybe hang the blame on creativity itself. So the way that, you know, I'm looking at things like creativities is that it's all about the intent behind the creativity. So we want something to go well, we want something to be better. So the intent is already positive, and then how we're going to go about it needs to be considered, matured, and you know, professional as possible. So I don't feel creativity needs to sit in the same box as recklessness, as it were, or irresponsibility. I think you can be creative and responsible.
It's an important distinction that you make between risk-taking, which people naturally associate with creativity. Creativity does entail risk taking, because not everything that we do in the name of creativity produces something that is beneficial, that has an outcome that is useful. So how would you teach students the difference between being reckless and taking risks?
Okay, yeah. So I think it's all about. I hate to use the term risk assessment or intent management. So you've got to know what your intention is. You know what I mean? What am I looking to get at the end of this? And then what are the steps that I'm going to take? And in those steps, what have I assumed and what have I garnered evidence for? And I think in that little step of, okay, well, what are my assumptions and what do I actually have evidence for? You tend to then know how to manage any risk. The recklessness comes from, and again, I do hear this in creative spheres, which is, you know, this is my art form and I'm just going to express myself. And that's fine if you're putting one piece of work out that affects no one. However, if you're running an organization, you're working with a team, you can't afford to take that attitude without understanding that you need to bring people with you. You need to understand that some of what you do has a consequence on partners. So, you know, one part of our organization is we do business development, and part of that business development is helping organizations to put on events to meet more people, and the events are a great way for them to express their organizational creativity and interpret little things like networking with their own identity, or expressing a festival with their own identity. But very often then, you know, you don't want a show to run over. And yes, it's a great show. Yes, the talent matters, but think about your volunteers. Like, how are they going to get home after? Think about your audiences. Are they going to be able to access these arts in other ways without being physically there? So that's where, you know, for me, when we start to teach the difference between recklessness and I suppose responsibility or risk taking, it's about who is this going to affect and in what way, and you can still express yourself and be responsible.
Yes, I agree with you. It's about thinking about the impact of our actions on the others. So combined with our intention, we can't always, you know, just justify our actions and saying, well, my intentions were good. Well, did I think about the impact of those intentions on others?